Hello everybody, welcome fellow map makers to this week's live mapping session. Nice to see you. I'm Ralph Schamann of Profanity Software and we're meeting here tonight to show you a bit of Campaign Cartographer, our map making software. I hope you're all doing okay. Created some nice maps. Okay, Sue tells me I'm a little quiet. Let's see whether I can increase my volume a little bit. On the recording it's already maxed out. Let's see whether we can increase the Okay, I hope this looks a little bit better. See, at least the volume showing on my recording software is a bit better now. Let me know if it's still too quiet and I can still up the volume a little bit. Okay, Sue tells me it's better now. Great. Tonight we do have a very big topic actually I want to cover during the video. Actually, I'll not be creating a map as such, but I want to go through all the different sheet effects we have available and show you how to use them and talk a little bit about sheets in general and what their purpose is and what differentiates them from layers and so on. So kind of consider it a lesson on the functionality of Campaign Cartographer tonight. If you have any questions that come up during my session, just post them on the YouTube chat and Sue will collect them and forward them to me, and I'll try to answer anything I can during the session. Good. So see what we have with sheets in Campaign Cartographer. I'm going to be using the little dungeon map here as a demonstration map during the session. So let's delete the welcome text so we can see what's going on here. Sheets are Campaign Cartographer's way of organizing stuff in the display order, what to show on top of something else, and also a way to add special effects like drop shadows, transparencies and stuff to a set of objects. In that way, sheets function quite a lot like Photoshop's or other software's layers. And as we do have layers in Campaign Cartographer as well, it's perhaps best to start out with explaining the difference between the two and what's what in Campaign Cartographer. If you click the layer indicator on top on your current drawing properties toolbar on top, you'll see all the different layers that are included in a map. And layers is what's traditionally been the way to organize things in Campaign Cartographer. It's basically a way to organize objects according to thematic purpose and hide and show different layers depending on whether you want to have gem-only information and so on. The thing what layers do not do in Campaign Cartographer is they do not define the drawing order. So you could have stuff mixed up here. Something on doors can be above the walls layer and something else on doors can be below the walls layer. Layers simply do not have any influence on the order objects are displayed in Campaign Cartographer. Sheets were already available in Campaign Cartographer 2 Pro back then, but mainly as a way to have different drawings of different maps in one drawing. You could show one sheet and hide another and have two separate but related maps within the same drawing file. With Campaign Cartographer 3, when we added effects and more bitmap operations to Campaign Cartographer, we needed a way to make these work, and sheets were the obvious choice there, because sheets also define the order in which things are displayed. If you put something on the background sheet and something on the symbols sheet, everything on the symbols sheet will always be above and displayed later in the map than the stuff on the background sheet. And we could take these and then attach effects to certain sheets that would be applied to all the entities on the same sheet, like a glow around text or drop shadows on symbols. And because these were rendered one after another on displaying on the sheet on the screen, these effects can work on the pixel, the bitmap representation of stuff, and not only on the vector objects in the drawing. And that's basically where the difference in naming comes from, because layer is older in Campaign Cartographer. It's not related to sheet effects and the drawing order of things. Everything that's what layers do in Photoshop or similar graphics or packages is handled by sheets in Campaign Cartographer. So if we are talking about sheets, and what we'll be mostly doing in this, we are opening the Sheets and Effects dialog and applying sheet effects here, and we can order stuff. Say, for example, in this map, you see the walls are on top of the floor object showing above. If I change the order of sheets, say if I move the walls sheet up, so it's just above the floors sheet or in the list, it will display earlier, meaning the floors gets drawn later and will be on top of the walls. See, now this shows the other way around. So let's move the walls back down to where they belong, and see we are back to the way displayed previously. So much for the difference between sheets and layers. And now let's turn to the stuff that sheets allowed us to add to Campaign Cartographer, which is sheet effects. Basically, when Campaign Cartographer displays the map on screen, it renders all the objects shown. And as it goes through the list of entities in the map, it does the background sheet first, then would go to the outside sheet and so on. And the first one with effects here, say it renders the floors, then it renders everything on the water sheet. After it's rendered the water sheet in memory, it applies the sheet effect that's attached to the sheet. And in this case, it's an edge fade effect, meaning it will just fade out the edge of the entities on the water sheet towards the outside, and you'll see this smooth transition of textures between the floor and the water textures. Effects can also apply to the whole drawing. If you switch to the whole drawing option here, then you'll have effects that will be applied after everything else has been rendered. So you can do stuff like do a black and white bitmap effect or other stuff at the end that applies to the whole map. But mostly in Campaign Cartographer, we're looking at effects to render certain sheets differently, apply certain stuff to special kinds of objects, and this is all done through the effects on the individual sheets. So let's, for just a quick example, with water with the edge fade effect here, if I turn that off, you can see I have this harsh line between the water texture and the floor texture, and the effect creates the soft transitioning. This also means that effects are always applied to the whole sheet. So if I had another object on the same sheet, say I have a different water texture and I've got a spot here on top of the other water texture, you'll see that the edge fade effect is not applied to this circle here. That's because Campaign Cartographer looks for the edge of objects on the whole sheet, and this would be the outer water line. To have the edge fade applied to the circle as well, we'd have to create a second sheet with a similar or the same effect applied to it. So Campaign Cartographer sees that as a different sheet. That's why sometimes, if you draw a texture across another and are expecting to see an edge fade effect, it won't show, and you need to set up a separate sheet for that. So much for the general setup of sheets. Let's go through the sheet and effects dialog and through the different effects we have available in Campaign Cartographer. I'll turn off most of the sheets here and apply the examples to the floors sheet so we can see easily what's going on there. Just hiding the sheets here for the moment. And so I just have the blank floor rectangle here, and you see there's no effects applied to that, no edge fade or anything. And we can see what's going on when we apply the various effects we have available. Just on the dialog, you can activate and deactivate the sheets effects themselves here. On top, you can select whether the effects you're adding should apply to the whole drawing or just the selected sheet, as I was saying. You can add, edit, and delete current effects here. Since a few updates ago, you can also copy and paste sheet effects between different sheets or even between different drawings. Very useful. And also, quite importantly, you can move effects up and down in the list, what to apply first and later. Down there on the effects presets, you can save your own sets of sheet effects. That's very handy if you do your own customization on maps. You have something different from the standard templates. You can save your sets and apply them later to different maps if you want to have the same set of effects on a new map. And then we have the redraw on OK option that just tells us to redraw the whole map when we close the sheets and effects dialog. So let's move this a little bit to the side and see what different effects we can add to a map. Also we click add, and then we have a nice selection of different sheet effects here. Let's start alphabetically with the adjust hue and saturation effect. This is basically a fairly simple effect, quite effective, that lets you change the colorization and other bitmap values of the entities on the sheet you're applying it to. So see, we've got the gray bitmap here. Say we do want something a little bit more colorful in the map we are creating, but we don't want to add a new bitmap texture. Don't want to work outside of Campaign Cartographer to create that. We can just change the hue here and okay, apply, and see, now we have a bluish texture in the background. Very quickly and easily. The only caveat is, as with all sheet effects, it will apply to all the objects on the sheet. So if we wanted to make a gray and a bluish background from the same bitmap texture, we'd have to set up two different sheets for that. Saturation is basically how strong the coloring is in the map, how vivid the coloring is. The gray now, at the moment, it's fairly grayish. Say we actually in Campaign Cartographer, I just noticed this, a little while ago, the saturation seems a bit backwards. Putting in a negative value will actually make the image brighter. I was expecting it to be the other way around, but that's how it is. See, putting in the positive value makes the texture lose color, and putting it in a negative value will add a stronger coloring tone. Well, that's just something you need to know, and you'll find out if you're using this. So, oh, gotta say hello to the cat. Hi, Asa, how are you doing? Let's see, okay. She needs a bit of attention at the moment. Not the best of times. Cat, come on. And let's put in the negative value here. And lightness is, as I say, how dark or how bright your coloring is. See, if we add 50%, see that the color will get much lighter. And the other way around, if we put in negative value, the coloring will get darker. Okay. See, adjust your saturation is a quick and easy way to meddle with the colors and your brightness of the colors you're using on a sheet. And it works similar to tools like adjusting color values in Photoshop or other graphics software. It's temporary. You can always turn the effect off to go back to your standard color. Alright, next one. Next one, we actually have two ones which are fairly similar, Bevel and Bevel Lighted. Of these, Bevel is the original and slightly older effect. Bevel is what you call an effect that makes the edges of your objects look three-dimensional, basically like it's upturned or downturned edge of an object. And this can also be very effective to create things like steps and other raised objects on the map, because it will always give a 3D impression of the objects you're applying them to. So the length will be in units, and the effect units we're giving can be defined, which is common to most of the sheet effects, in three different ways. We can the typical thing on a floor plan map like I'm having here is I will define the length in map units, meaning this is a imperial map, so 1 unit is a foot, and then in this case the length of the bevel will be 3 feet on the map. If I choose the percent of drawing extents width, which is the setting you mostly use for an overland map, this will be 3% of the overall size of the map, as defined by the map border. So that means no matter how large your actual map is in drawing units, the effects will always appear the same relative to the map size. The third option, which is much more rarely used, is the percent of view width, which means it's always calculated on depending on what section of the map you're showing. And so it will always be the same absolute size on screen, but vary in relative size when you change the zoom level. So let's change the map features first. And apply it, and there you can see the bubble on the map. Strength is just an indicator how strong the effect is on these. See, having higher value in there will make the brightness and darkness sections brighter and darker respectively, while a low value will just have a very soft bevel effect. You can change the direction of the lighting just by inverting color, but this is the the standard bevel effect has just fixed light direction. You can just switch it around by 180 degrees, and that's it. The other option is the fade effect that gives a smooth transition between the edges of your bevel, as you can see here. So just for example, if I'm showing the map here in map units, if I change to drawing extent width, I think it will not change because my map is actually 100 foot across. So in this special instance, the effects will be exactly the same. But if I choose change to percent view width, as we'll see, it gets much smaller because it's just 3% of my current view. If I leave the Sheets and Effects dialog and zoom out, you'll see that it appears to get wider, the bevel. But that's just because I've changed the zoom level. It's in pixel on screen. This is actually exactly the same as the previous view. Well, if I zoom in, it appears smaller, but it's remains at the same pixel size. Go back to map units. So this was the first basic bevel effect we had in Campaign Cartographer, but it does have some limitations, especially that the lighting direction can't be changed, except for just inverting it. And so a little later, we introduced a second, more involved bevel effect. Oop, that's the wrong one. Let's add a new one. That's the bevel lighted effect. Again, you have the effect units down here, and the bevel size is the same as in the previous one. And the intensity is the strength of the brightening and darkening effect. But you have other options here. The lightness base is basically what's your average level for the bevel, average lighting. It's at 50% here. And then the lightness range is how far up in the total lighting it goes up and down for the darker and lighter effects. So if you want a stronger effect, you can increase this lightness range. Let's move this a bit so you can see that. You can see here the effect is pretty strong. Oh, I forgot. Where's my... Intensity 100% is already pretty strong. Say if I go lightness base, if we apply 0 here, it will be very dark. With 100%, it will be very bright. And here we can change the range of the effect. Smoothing again gives the transition, but not to the middle here, but to the along the corners. So it basically smooths out the corners of your bevel. Yeah, as Sue just mentions, the bevels that use, if you increase the bevel size to a very high value, basically beyond the size of your object, you'll have this. It will meet in the bevel, will meet in the metal and create a roof or hill shape. So that's something to bear in mind. And then we've got a curve you can apply to the bevel. This basically that's how the edges of your object are formed. One is straight. If I put in a 5. You'll see that it looks like it's a concave line, basically. If you would view it from the side. Okay, then we have a couple more settings down here. I won't cover the effect units again. That's the same as in the previous one. High quality is just speed thing, which is not very applicable at today's machines anymore. You can just keep that turned on. But the global sun direction, if you turn off the global sun direction, you can set the direction of the lighting yourself. The azimuth is the direction along the basically the clock, around the clock, where the sun is coming from. 0 degrees is coming straight from the east. See, the brightest edge is on the east, on the right side, and the north and south sides have the same brightness. So if 90% would be coming from the south, and so on around the clock. And the default is 15 degrees, which is coming from the top right. And the elevation is the how high your light source is up in the sky, basically. So 45 degrees angle is pretty much in the middle. If you put in a low value, you'll get strong shadows. So stronger shadows because the light is falling more along the horizontal line, and the object blocks the light more strongly if you put in higher elevation. The light will come from the top. Basically, the normal stuff is 90 degrees up from the very top. You can go further around, but basically you would at some point light the object from below, which doesn't show in the drawing. There we go. For the global sun direction, I think it's useful to give you a little another setting. If I turn this on, if I keep this on and have several different effects that use the sun direction, it will always be governed by the overall global sun direction we set. And we can change that global sun direction by going to the display speed settings, right click the button and choose the global sun option. And here again you've got the settings for the global sun. Again, you can set the azimuth, you can set the inclination, and you can set the intensity of the lighting. You can also just make it stronger or weaker at this point here. But that's just a side note. It's not directly in the sheets and effects dialog, but it does affect quite a few of the sheets. So that's the sheet effects we've covered here. Let's actually show this a little bit better again, so you can see what's going on here. So what do we have next? We do have the blend mode. Blend mode I personally use mostly just for doing transparencies. The normal blend mode will set you opacity to blend the objects on this sheet into the background. So if I use a 50% opacity, you can see we are blending the object into the background. You do have quite a lot of different options available. You can lighten, darken, you can do all kinds of mathematical operations on the bitmap values, on the RGB values basically of the texture with the background. But I don't find most of them very useful for mapping, or it might just be me for not being too well versed with bitmap operations. See, you can do all kinds of stuff here. Give it a try. Change values around here. You can get lots of different effects on your texture, on your objects. But I normally just keep to the normal mode and adjust my transparency that way. See, this is 75% opacity with the background texture showing through my stone background. And if you are more familiar with Photoshop and other graphics software that uses blend modes, these are the same as Sue mentions in the comments as the others. So if you want to recreate something that you're used to doing in Photoshop, you can use these in here as well. Next up is the good old blur. And it's very simple. Basically, it blurs all the pixels in a certain distance. So say if I do a strong blur, 1 unit is a whole foot here in map units, and apply that, you'll see that the whole object, the whole sheet will get blurry. I don't use that effect very much for a couple of reasons. First off, it basically gets rid of all texture, all fine texture detail. If you've got stuff like the stone texture here, it just gets a blurry gray mass. And it's also very speed intensive effect. So if you have many blur effects on your map, redrawing and displaying the map will get quite a lot slower. So be careful with blur effects. They can be useful on vector maps if you want to soften the harsh lines a little bit. So I sometimes use them if I want to update older vector styles into more bitmap similar styles. But in general, I try to avoid blur effects. Next up, we do have the blur alpha effect, which is similar, but it does have some advantages because it can restore the image and actually just have the blur on the outside. So say the percent is how strong. The effect is, again, the units, the size. And as you can see here, we do get the blur effect on the edge of the object, but not on the texture itself, which can be quite nice. So if you want something to just blur the edge of stuff, blur alpha might be the effect you want to use. Next up is a very nice effect which I've been using a lot in recent styles to create rivers and stuff in overland maps. And which basically what it does, it can cut out sections of the sheet you're applying it to. So we define a knockout color with the effect, and that's the color which will get replaced by nothing on the sheet. So let's show you an example. It's typically good to have a clear and easy to spot color. That's especially it needs to be unique, because you don't want to knock out any sections of the sheet that you haven't defined. And then you can set how strong, how much opacity you want in the replaced sections. Normally, if you want to do a complete cutout, you leave this at 0%. And then what you do, you change your settings to a solid fill color with the color you're choosing to knock out as the knockout color. Then you draw an object on the sheet. Well, can do multiple ones, do some complex shapes. Then you apply the sheet effect, and you can see that Campaign Canvas simply cuts out the pieces of the texture that you've applied to that you've drawn. And very nicely you can combine that with other effects. So say we want to apply a bevel. And you can see it's a bit complicated shape for the bevel, but you can see what we are doing here. All the effects just get applied to the object with the holes cut in it. Here it's a good point to show you the difference in what the order has that our effects are applied in. If I do the bevel effect first, then the cutout from the color key will just cut into the already beveled object, and no bevel edges get applied to the cutouts. If I move the lighted bevel down and apply the effects, they will be taken into account when the bevel gets applied. So we do get a bevel effect around the holes in our objects. Okay, we've got a question here. Good moment to... David asks, can we use blur alpha with symbols? That's a very good question. Actually, normally quite a few effects like blur cannot apply to symbols, but we'll give that a try. I actually don't know. I've never tried that. So let's show the symbol sheet. It does have a certain effect applied at the moment. I'm gonna turn this off. You don't need to delete an effect to disable it for a moment. You can always click the little checkbox, so you'll still have it around if you want to reapply it later. And then let's add a blur alpha effect. What do they have here? The 50%. Actually, it does. Blur alpha effect does work with symbols. So that might be a quite interesting little way to apply a blur to the symbols. What it doesn't do, let's see what. Okay, interesting. If I turn off the color data, we get a very strange effect. Might actually be useful for some nice glowy effects or something. See, I'm learning something new as I'm working on this as well. Interesting. Alright, so let's go back to the floor sheet and hide our symbols again. We were working on the color key effect. Now one of the difficult ones, display effect. Displacement sheet effect is basically an operation on the pixels depending on another image we are using, and the intricacies there are more than I normally care about, and I am not very familiar with the effects. To load up a bitmap to apply these effects, I go to the Campaign Canvas Program Data folder, C3+, and then the filters folder, and we do have a lot of images in here with different color black and white bump maps and stuff. So we could choose one of these, and if we then apply this, let's try it with the, you will see that we get a edge effect that takes basically the black and white texture from the bitmap we're using and applies this to the text or sheet in question. I am pretty sure this can be used in all sorts of cool ways. See, if I increase the text size here in units, you'll see that we can get stuff like broken edges and transitions where pixels are hidden and shown in a semi-random way. And but I am not too familiar with that. What you can see is that this effect actually applies to all the edges in the bitmap texture, or basically you don't really see it in the texture because it's similar in pattern to the effect here, but what it actually does, it applies this effect to the whole bitmap. So if I were to choose to change the texture of our floor, probably see this more clearly. Fill style. Let's see a bitmap with a clearer pattern. And you can see that the pixels are displaced depending on the black and white texture we've applied. See something where we can actually see the effect more clearly. If I choose the ball here, you can, let's make it even perhaps a little bit larger. No, that's too large. You can see that basically puts this shape, this round shape, into the texture of the overall map. And I'm sure there are very good applications to that, but I'm just not very familiar with them. Seeing the limits of my knowledge in regards to bitmap operations. Let's actually remove our cutout objects here, our bright green stuff, and what we should do is go back to our gray stone texture and go back to our effects, because next up is the classical drop shadow. A very simple effect, often overused in graphic effects, but very useful to show certain 3D effect on objects. Basically, it's a shadow that the objects on the sheet are casting, and there's an offset in units that define here. So I want a 5-foot offset. How transparent should the shadow be? The color of the shadow will always black with this effect, and there's 50%, so is the opacity of the black, and then a blur to make this. Let's do a 0 blur first, so you can see the straight object. Okay, let's make it a bit smaller so we can see it better. And there you can see the drop shadow. Very simple effect. The thing is, you can set the direction, but only by putting in negative and positive values into the units. If I do a negative X offset, basically it will move to the left. This way you could rotate the shadow around, but it's a bit complicated, and we'll have a better way to do that with the ladder effect. But if you want to do a quick drop shadow effect on something, the old classic drop shadow effect is your friend. Blur radius just blurs the edge of the shadow. See, this is a very soft one. If I keep it in the same range as the offset himself, you can see it more clearly. And good guidance I usually have for drop shadow effects: do the blur radius about half of your offset values to give you a still visible shadow, which isn't too strictly defined. Okay, that was the drop shadow. Next up is the ever popular edge fade, although actually the edge fade effect is mostly superseded by the inner edge fade effect nowadays. I'm still gonna show you the original one. And for that, I'm actually gonna switch to a different map because I like to use that as an effect to show borders. And this makes more sense on an overland map. See, you've got a nice little, very basic start of a landmass, overland map prepared. And we're gonna take a look on the political border sheet, which has an edge fade effect defined with the distance value. And here you can see that the overland effects are by default set to the third option, % of drawing extents width, instead of the map units. So what happens if we draw an outline, for example for a country border? We do need a solid fill for that, and just draw our map border here. Let's zoom in a bit, follow the coastline a little bit. First we do see the straight solid object, but with the sheet effects turned on, we do have the edge fade, which basically fades out the interior of the object. The distance still shown is the distance value in here, so if we double the size, you see a lot more of the color. If we halve the size, you'll see less. Invert colors does nothing here, but we can set the opacity of the interior. If we set that to 100%, and then if we invert colors, you'll see that we have the fill on the inside and the fade effect on the outside. See, if I keep a 50% opacity, we'll have the stronger border effect on the outside of the polygon, and then still interior colorization. What I sometimes like to do on political maps is keep perhaps a 10% opacity on the inside, which will slightly color the map in the area inside the borders and strongly show the borders themselves. But we also do have the edge fade inner effect. We can apply that also to the map border, to the map border here. Edge fade inner. It's got a few advantages over the edge fade effect because it also allows you to set the outer opacity. Basically, the outer opacity is here always at 100%, and say you can say 10% outer opacity, or say 80% outer opacity and the 20% inner opacity. Go back to my 1 unit, and here we are. Go back to see if I switch between map units and % of drawing extents width here, that changes a lot. That's because the map I'm using is 1,000 miles across, so basically a %. If I use this as the % value, it will be 10 times the size of when I use the map units value. And here I can simply, if I wanted to show you the other way around, I can just say reverse opacity, and then I have the higher opacity in the middle and the lower on the outside. It also, as you might notice, does a better job of fading from the outside into the interior of the object. That's the main advantage. If I choose differences, you can see that the direction is kind of always fixed, and if my border is perpendicular to the direction of the fading, then we get these more narrow strips and the wider strips in this direction. Edge Fade Inner takes care of that and always fades directly from the outside into the inside, no matter what direction the border is drawn in. So Edge Fade Inner is usually the better effect to use. Okay, that were the Edge Fade effects. Let's go back to our dungeon map. Next up are the glow effects. We have the old, the standard glow effect, which can set to the inside or the outside, with my glow shining out from all the objects on the sheet or into the interior. Set the color of our glow, let's say a dark red glow on the inside. The strength is an absolute, it's just an indicator of how large and strong our glow is, and it's actually a bit of a, it's in eighths of 100%, so each step is 12.5%, so it doesn't make any difference to use 17 or 12.5. It will always round to the same value. But if you put in 25%, it will go to the next step. Set the blur radius, basically is how strongly the glow fades into the surroundings. Go to map units again. And there's our insert dark red inside glow on the object. If I go on the outside, it shows like this. And for the difference, this is the 12.5% strength, and the next strength will be, and let's just take a look. If I put in 35%, yeah, it's basically the same. Where is it? Oh, I'm lying. No, see, 30% and 35% is the same. Higher values overfill the strength, the glow a lot, so you'll see a lot of the plain color. If you just want a more realistic glow emanating from object, it's usually better to stick to the lower values of the strength. Oh, I see Joe Slayton, our programmer, is in the chat. So that's good to know. He'll correct me if I'm telling any nonsense, but it always makes me nervous. All right, that was the glow effect. We do have an old inner glow effect still in the list. We mostly left that in for compatibility reasons. It works the same way as the outer glow, but since the outer glow now has an inner option, you can use that, and which is what I normally do. The inner glow effect is, I think, slightly differently applied, a little bit differently than the outer glow version or the glow version. So, but you can play around with it, but it basically works the same way. What works a little bit differently is the newer outer glow option, because that lets you set an opacity value for your glow. Basically, how strong or how opaque the glow around the object is. And it gives you a better control over the range of the glow. For example, what you can do here, you can say a 1 unit range, but no blur, and that gives you a just pixel perfect fixed color glow around the object, or outline around the object. And this is the effect I often used nowadays for text, to outline it and to make it stand out on any background. Let's just take a quick look here. And if I go to the text sheet and add some text, turn on sheet effects. Oh, I have actually did a bit experimentation. I have a wall shadow on here. I just wanted to show the outer glow. And this is a nice gray outline, which is actually, yeah, it does have 50% opacity. And so stuff will show through, but just a little bit. And it gives you very good control over how large your outline is. And if you can blur it a little if you want to. Say I want to just a little blur on the text here, and you'll hardly see it at this scale, but if I zoom in here, you can see I have to have a slight blur on the text outline. Okay, back to our floors sheet. Let's have a quick look at the time. I might not be able to cover everywhere. Perhaps we're doing a little bit longer today, because I think it's not enough to do a second session on the the rest of the sheet effects. No, not the edit. Add. Well, RGB Matrix project, another one that is a bit beyond my general use of bitmap effects. Basically what this allows you to do a very precise calculations on the color values and brightness values of the RGB matrix on your image. And what you can usually do is load up one of the existing preset effects. Again, we are going to our program data folder and loading up the filters and the settings here, and we do have quite a few different effects defined, just some of the basic stuff. And we see you can just turn the similar to adjust hue and saturation, but with a more precise control over everything in here. And you can also do a nice black and white filters. Oh, well, that doesn't show much on a black and gray texture. Let me show you by loading up one of the an example map from last annual, and here's already, see, this is an effect applied to the whole map. Go to the whole drawing sheet, and there's an RGB matrix process here. If I turn that off, you see the map in full color. And if you want to do a nice grayscale version for printing, or as an illustration, perhaps in a publication that should be in black and white, you can just add an RGB matrix process with the different, with one of the grayscales, or we do have a sepia effect. See, you get this faded out, old paper style coloring on the map. And I'm not going to go and try going into all the different color values, what does what in here. Basically, I probably would be getting it wrong myself. And I trust you to play around with that and take a look at the example settings provided. And play around with it. Back to the dungeon. So what is next? The screen border. this is not an effect I generally use. Basically, it's an effect that only works on the view of your map in Campaign Cartographer. It's not very useful for exporting. Basically, you can block out sections of the view you're having. Say you always want a white or black edge around whatever view you're showing in your map, you can define that with the screen border. Here I'm saying I want a 5% screen border around my view. For the moment I'm keeping this as white color, apply, and you can see, I'll perhaps make it back to the 10%, that makes it a bit clearer, that Campaign simply blocks out the 10% along the edge of the window. If I zoom out, see that we've got the white stripes up here. This is basically only because the effect is only applied to the sheet. It's normally more usually an effect that you'd apply to the whole map. So say I copy the effect over to the whole drawing, turn it off here, here it is turned on, apply. You can see Campaign Cartographer always shows 10% of the drawing edge as white. You could also do stuff like transitioning from black to a 50% white in the middle. And you can see you've got a screen effect here going around the edges. But that's just something for display. If you use Campaign Cartographer to display maps during perhaps an online session or showing, it might be useful. But that's an effect I don't usually bother with. Next up is the spatial matrix process, and again I think this is the one I have to really skip in showing any very useful stuff. It does have some similarities to the displace effect. Basically it gives you a matrix to apply to the pixels in the on the sheet, blurring them or displacing them. Let's show you an effect here if I can zoom in. Basically see you get the edge effect here, or the whole texture changes. It's a way to do operations on the pixels within the bitmap this effect is applied to, and quite frankly, the details are a bit beyond what I normally need or use in Campaign Cartographer. Edge displacement and all kinds of different things. If Joe has any useful tips and tricks on this, or an operation that has application in map making, in normal day-to-day map making, happy to post any links to that, perhaps to a forum post or something on the video later. On the other hand, very useful effect at times is the texture overblend. Basically, that's a way to apply a different texture to an object, and it is a way to basically change the texture of an object or sheet in Campaign Cartographer without messing with the defined texture fill styles. So, for example, if I'm loading up these the mixed forest fill here, I said just to test a scale in here, 5, and apply the effect. Oh, this is actually much too large. See, yeah, we might need to make it smaller. Still too large. There, that's better. you can see that we apply the bitmap texture we've selected to the object. So while this is actually an object with the stone gray flat bitmap, fill, applying the sheet effect to it, will blend over a different texture over the objects in here. And an interesting thing is you can actually rotate that texture. Say you have something that you will have a stone filling that you want to rotate or show a rotated version. You can put in a rotation value and have the bitmap texture shown at a different angle. The alpha blur, if you turn that off, you'll have clearer edges. With the alpha blur, you have this darker glow effect on the edge here of the object. This can be a very useful way to have certain sheets with textures without having to redefine all your bitmap fills or create a rotated texture of something that you want, which can be a bit hard to create if you have tiling objects, tiling textures. A texture overblend can be very useful in that regard. Okay, getting towards the end here, we do have the texturize. Texturize basically takes an image object, like here, relief. Let's take one of these here, and applies the texture to the objects on the sheet. See, if I apply this to the gray stone bitmap, I do get this relief effect of broken stone on the stone texture. This can also be very useful to give a certain 3D effect on textures in your map. So apply different feelings of surfaces. Cat is back here. Yes, Asa, I'm almost finished. Don't worry. I'll be there for you in a minute. Alright, so that was the texturize effect. Here you can say how strong the 3D effect on the texture is, how bright the whole effect will be, and to what size it is applied. Basically, this way it's much smaller, just to 1 foot. The image texture that it is applied to. If I make it larger, see that the texture spreads over a whole lot larger area. And then again, the global sun, basically because the 3D effect of the texture is lighted by the global sun, or is lit by the global sun. You can again say you want the global sun direction of the lighting, or define your specific lighting on the effect here if you turn the global sun off. Let's give it just a quick try to see whether we can see the difference. Say you want a 90 degrees direction. See, the basic pattern is still the same, but where the shadows fall and everything is totally different. And a good old effect, which I tend to use the blend mode more these days, but you can still use just a plain transparency effect by applying, say, a 25 opacity only to our gray background. Let's move out a bit. See, you just see a bit of the texture, a quarter of the visibility of the texturize effect. Or have an almost opaque version at 95%. See, there you can see the texture again. Simple and straightforward, just one value to put in. And All right, Joe has a note on spatial matrix process in the comments. Well, I might need to look at that myself. Good. Wall shadows. Basically the last set of effects we have in here. The standard wall shadow effect, again, is the slightly older version of the effect, which lets you define the length of the objects. In certain ways, it's very similar to the drop shadow effect. You define a length of the shadow, the opacity, and how blurred the whole thing is supposed to be. Map units and apply the effect, and you have the shadow on the object. The difference to a drop shadow is that the shadow is cast as if this was a solid object going up, while the drop shadow just sees it as a flat object with nothing underneath. You spot the difference, especially if the corner of the shadow. Let's see the difference. If I do let's delete some of the effects here. If I do the drop shadow, you see it looks like the floor is just a sheet floating on top of the background. With the wall shadow effect, you see it looks like it's a whole cube or box sitting on top of the background. And as I said before, I'm not using the drop shadow that much these days. That's because both are basically you can create both with the wall shadow directional effect, which gives you a bit more control over the whole thing. First off, you can set the color, while the drop shadow and wall shadow effects only are black. Here you can set a color for your shadow effect. Again, you set the length and the blur radius, just in other effects, map units, and what you can do here, you can set the sun direction again, direction of your sun, or use the global sun, apply, and there you can see our blue effect. And if I want a drop shadow instead of a wall shadow, I just click the draw as drop shadow option, and then we do have the same as if we used a drop shadow, but with the additional color option and the direction options. So it's just more versatile than the basic drop shadow and wall shadow effects. But we keep the others around for compatibility, so if you have them in an older map, that they still work. And sometimes they're just simpler to use because they have less values to put in. And that's what I will be covering today, because the last two ones are for lighting, and I've covered these in the previous videos, and they do need some additional stuff like defining lights in the map, and doesn't make much sense to show them as effects only. Just keep in mind these are if you want to do dynamic lighting, like torches with a light radius and objects casting shadows on the map. I'll probably do one on this in a little more depth, perhaps at a later time again, revisiting some of the stuff I've done before. But in the meantime, check out the video on lighting in dungeons, and it will show you how these effects are used. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you tonight. I hope this was useful for you. You learned a little bit. Sheet effects, very powerful tool, and to make your maps look pretty, to do 3D effects, lightings, shadows, all kinds of neat stuff. And knowing your way around them is a very useful thing for creating your own maps. So I hope you enjoyed this, and see you again next week. All the best, and